What's going on, guys? Today I wanted to talk about Alibaba. I want to spend part of the video discussing China's economy and where it could be headed in 2024. But most of the video we will spend looking at Alibaba's buyback program and how it could affect EPS numbers as well as valuation over the next year. So if you enjoyed the video, drop a like down below, and if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure to subscribe. Let's start off by taking a look at Alibaba's stock chart. We can see that over the last year the stock is down over 26%, and from its 52-week highs, which are almost a year ago exactly, the stock is down over 36%. And if you zoom out, things don't get any better. We can see that over the last 5 years, Alibaba's stock price is down over 45%. And even from its IPO back in 2014, the stock is down over 18%. And the Chinese economy over the last couple of years has slowed down in a major way. And this is vastly different than what we saw in the US, where the economy rebounded very quickly after the pandemic. In China, things have slowed down a lot. We saw issues with their housing market. We saw issues with them opening cities and then closing them back down months later as the pandemic took off again. And a lot of the government has really ignored these issues until recently. And it wasn't until about a year ago that we saw China actually remove their zero pandemic policy. And this was a massive strain on their economy, because what they were doing is they had many cities that would open up for a very short period of time, and if they saw their cases increase in any significant manner, then the government would step in and shut down the city. And this caused the economy to be opening and closing all the time across China, and no one could really go back to their job and establish routines. And this had a massive downward effect on the overall economy, because you could not go out and spend, you could not earn money, and it really just created a strain for businesses like Alibaba. And in my opinion, I think this was all a show from President Xi to help him get re-elected. He was showing how much power he had over the country. He even at one point took to removing the ex-president from a meeting that they were having. And this kind of, again, asserted the amount of power that he had over even powerful people within the government. And what we have seen more recently from Xi is a lot more willingness to work on the Chinese economy and start turning it around. He has visited the United States, and now we have seen him actually come out and admit that there is a problem in China. We saw recent comments from President Xi around the Chinese economy, saying some enterprises had a tough time and some people had difficulty finding jobs and meeting basic needs. And in my opinion, I think this is going to be massive for Alibaba and the Chinese economy. The fact that President Xi has came out and admitted that there's a problem shows that he is willing to take the steps forward to reverse some of the issues that we have seen over the last couple of years. We saw a lot of restrictions being put on big businesses within China like Alibaba by the Chinese government. They were fining the business, they were restricting it, and this caused Alibaba's stock to fall in a major way, because there was a lot of uncertainty around how China would treat the business and what they could possibly do in the future. But now, with President Xi pulling back some of those restrictions, admitting that there is a problem, as well as working closer with the US, these are all very good signs for Alibaba and for Alibaba's stock price. And obviously, things are still not perfect by any means. We saw Alibaba in their most recent earnings announcement talk about how they will no longer spin off their business into 6 different entities. And this comes on the back of news that the US would be restricting what types of chips could be sent to China. And since this time, we have actually seen companies like Nvidia and AMD produce lower powered chips that could be sold within China. So overall, this is going to be a positive for Alibaba's cloud business, but they still won't be as competitive as companies like Amazon and Google Cloud. And obviously, with all of that going on, the stock price has been affected in a very negative way. Again, down 26% over the last year. However, with the stock being down in a major way, this presents a very good opportunity for Alibaba to buy back shares at discounted prices. And in the first quarter of 2023, we saw Alibaba repurchase around 21.5 million ADSs for around $1.9 billion US dollars. And in the second quarter ending in June, they increased those numbers massively. They repurchased around 35.6 million ADSs for around $3.1 billion. And in their most recent announcement ending in September, they repurchased around 18.6 million ADSs for about $1.7 billion. And with those purchases, they still have around $14.6 billion remaining in their buyback program, and this program is effective through March of 2025. The thing is, this doesn't mean a whole lot because a lot of of these boards will approve more funds for their buybacks before this period runs out. So they could, in theory, spend this 14.6 in 2024 and then still approve more funds in the back half of the year. So we can actually use those numbers and figure out where exactly Alibaba is repurchasing their own shares at. So again, we have 1.9 in the first quarter, 3.1 in the second quarter, and 1.7 in the third quarter. And if we look at the shares repurchased that we pulled from those earnings announcements, we can actually just divide the amount that was bought back divided by the number of shares, and that will come up with these prices. So we can see in the first quarter, they bought back their own shares at an average of around $88, in the second quarter around $87, and in the third quarter around $91. And this is an average of about $89. And this brought their total shares outstanding down to around 2.5 billion shares. And here we could see those numbers shown graphically. And if you look closely at this, there's really two different phases that Alibaba has gone through over the last 5 years. They spent about 2.5 years of actually increasing their shares outstanding, where they brought their numbers up from around 2.6 billion shares outstanding all the way up to 2.76 billion shares outstanding. However, over the last 2.5 years, they have focused a lot more on decreasing their shares outstanding. We can see that over the last 2 years, they've focused on bringing these numbers down by around 3% year over year. And that has dropped them all the way down to where they're sitting at now of around 2.5 billion shares outstanding. So I've used the last 3 quarters that we had of, again, 1.9, 3.1, and 1.7 billion dollars spent on share buybacks to come up with an average of those 3 and projected them over the next 4 quarters. So the average of those 3 numbers comes out to $2.23 billion. So now we need to start making some assumptions. For the fourth quarter, we really don't have to make any assumptions about price. We can actually look at Alibaba's stock chart, and we know that the stock has been trading around $80. So I'm making the assumption that Alibaba bought back some of their shares with an average price of $80, and that means that they have repurchased around 27 to 28 million shares this quarter. We will see if that number is actually true here in their next earnings announcement in a couple of months. However, for these next 3 quarters, we had to assume where the stock price would go and where Alibaba would try and repurchase shares. We saw again that the average for the first 3 quarters was around $89. So I just rounded that up to $90 per share. And what that comes out to is around 24.7 million shares bought back for each of the next 3 quarters. And then what we can do with those numbers is actually take our current shares outstanding and subtract these repurchase shares for each quarter. And what that does over the next year is drop our total shares outstanding to just under 2.4 billion shares. And year over year, that's a decrease of just over 4%, which is fairly in line with the numbers we were seeing before. Again, anywhere from around 3% all the way up to 4.8% year over year change in shares outstanding. For net income, we have to make some assumptions as well. I put in $20 billion, and I think this is a fair estimate. If we look at the last 5 years, we can see that their current trailing 12-month net income is around $18.5 billion. However, just a couple years ago, they were bringing in net incomes anywhere from around $19 billion all the way up to around $24.7 billion. So in my opinion, with the economy starting to turn around, I think they should be able to achieve $20 billion by the end of 2024. And we can use this projected net income of around $20 billion and divide it by the shares outstanding to get an EPS number of $8.34. If we take the current share price of $76.59 and divide it by this EPS number, we get a forward P ratio of 9.18. In my opinion, Alibaba should be trading somewhere closer to a forward P ratio of 17.5. And if we were to see that happen over the next year or so, that would mean that the price in 2024 could jump up to $145.97. So as you look at this number, just keep in mind the assumptions that are being made that are getting us to this point. The first assumption is buybacks. We're assuming that the company is going to spend around $2.23 billion per quarter for the next 4 quarters on buying back their own shares. The second assumption is around the price that Alibaba is able to buy their shares back at. We're assuming that in the 4th quarter, they were able to buy shares back around $80. And then for the next 3 quarters, being able to buy shares back around $90. And then the final assumption is around net income. We're assuming $20 billion. Again, I think this is fair based off what we saw a couple years ago and what we are seeing the company do now with their net income starting to go up in a major way. So here I've actually adjusted all of those numbers to a lot more conservative case. case. So this is $1.7 billion for the next 4 quarters instead of that 2.23, and I increased the price to around $100 for the next 3 quarters. Again, $80 we know, we've seen the price over the last quarter, and $80 I believe is a fair price for what Alibaba is traded at and where they likely bought shares back. So I left this at 80, and then I did decrease the net income to around $18 billion. Again, we've seen 18.5, so if they're able to stick where they're at right now, they should easily be able to achieve that. With that, that drops their EPS down to around 7.41, $7.41. A share price, again, of our current share price would result in a PE ratio of 10.33, and if we assume a potential forward PE ratio of 17.5, that would still mean that the stock would go up to around $129.75. So honestly, that's kind of where my price target is at for the end of 2024. I think Alibaba a year from now will be trading anywhere from around $120 all the way up to potentially $150. That's personally where I think it's going to go, and that's why I am long Alibaba, and it's a very large position in my portfolio. But keep in mind, do not buy a company just because some random guy on YouTube talked about it. Make sure you are doing your own research and looking into companies that meet your risk tolerance as well as your time horizon. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like down below, and if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure to subscribe. And as always, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day.